Good afternoon and welcome to Office Hours. I'm BevNet Editor-in-Chief Jeff Kleinman, and today we're going to be talking about retailing. If you think about it, every purchase entails retail disruption. A bottle pulled from the cooler, an ice cream from the freezer, they cause a void at the shelf, a break in a perfect merchandising plan. But that disruption is anticipated, and the act of that disruption feeds a constantly evolving evaluation of products to determine increasing or decreasing demand. The nightly and weekly resets of categories reflect that regular post-disruption return to order, one that's constantly undertaken by vendors and store workers alike. But now we're in the era of ghost stores and senior shopping hours, of personal protective equipment and dividers at the cash register, of Zoom product pitches and chain-wide allocations. How do you create order when the world has thrown a COVID-19 sized bowling ball through your planogram so that not just short-term resets, but long-term category and product reviews, the ones that only take place once or twice a year, are completely mixed up? The entire industry is dependent on that planning cycle to determine what will happen for the year to come. Those buyer meetings that you spend thousands of dollars on in travel and hotel, the approvals that result in increased time at your co-packer to get enough of your new product into the pipeline, that money you've raised for marketing and sales efforts, they all have to wait. Maybe will even be delayed for the year because, like so many other employees, retail buyers are pretty much frozen in place, putting innovation on the back burner and hoping to fill the shelves with products that at least echo familiarity. So what are entrepreneurial brands, and not just startups, but innovative companies of all sizes, supposed to do at a time when grocery trips are down and impulse purchasing is largely happening online? How do you start or solidify a winning partnership with a retailer when the stores are as much crisis centers as they are proving grounds? To help us figure out, we're bringing in a pair of retailing experts to join the discussion. To begin with, we welcome John Maggiore, who spent 30 years in the food business, the last 17 running a brokerage and consultancy that specializes in high growth brands like Vita Coco, Red's Burritos, and Siggy's. He's in touch with buyers across the country, either as a broker or a broker manager, and he's here to paint the picture of the current retail purchasing environment. As always, we want you to join us and participate in the conversation. So please email questions to ask@BevNET.com or text them to 781-423-3520, and we'll get them on as soon as we can today. John, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here, Jeff.
So I've decided early on that we're going to use you initially as a correspondent from the on-the-ground view. So for your clients, what have the last 8 weeks been like in terms of selling in and moving product?
Well, it's been so different. I mean, what's happening is so unpredictable day to day. The buyer's job has transitioned to focus on getting product onto the shelf, which was like an afterthought in the past. It was just something that just happened. Now all of a sudden they're a lot more engrossed into it. So it's a whole domino effect of what's gone on with buyers not being in the office. But, you know, I tell people, even if they were in the office, they wouldn't have time to meet with vendors anyway. So it's a different way of life for them. There's so much different things happening unordinary. So what's really happening out there is the buyers are doing their best they can to look at new items, but they know that the resets have been changed. They know that the model is going to be different for the back half of 2020, unlike it's ever been before. and they're going to do the best they can to get the best optimum product out there on the shelf for their consumers. Nobody knows when the end date's going to be, when the transition's officially going to happen. Some chains have gone back to start doing resets again. Others still have them on hold. Certain chains will be pushing them back, but it's also going to be a juggling effect because some categories need to be reset at certain times. You take the soup category or the baking needs category. You can't push those resets off until December or January because they need to be done before the season. So it's probably going to mean that some retailers are going to be juggling up their reset schedules to get the key commodity categories done at the right time.
Weren't there a lot of categories that had already slowed their reviews even before this hit?
Yeah, many chains have gone to basically reviewing categories once a year, except for a few of the high volume, high turnover categories, such as yogurt or nutrition bars and things like that. So in some cases, if category reviews get canceled, basically it could be 2 years between reviews or with some of the retailers. And that's a fact of life. I mean, the buyers, their hands are going to be tied because there's only so many resources they can put towards the resets.
So let's talk about resets for a minute. What's going on in the stores on like a nightly or a weekly basis? And what's the significance of that in the marketplace?
Now, I'm sure everybody's been in stores. You've seen the stores have been, honestly, they're a mess because they've gone through so much product. So, tags are missing, things. Planogram integrity is not what it once was in probably any store. Guys are just trying to fill up the shelves with any product that they get coming in. So the reset's going to definitely take some time to get done. And the stores have to get back straightened out. So that's what the buyers are really going to be focused on first. And so typically with resets, you've got, 3 different types. You got like a full category review, category reset. You've got one that's like an adjustment, and then you've got like a pull and plug. So the first one, the major reset, where the buyer category manager really digs into the numbers, decides what the best items are, what the optimum set is, and they recreate the planogram from scratch. In many cases, those are going to get canceled, or they're going to get changed to be like an adjustment. What's an adjustment? Kind of what it says. We can bring in some new brands, we can bring in some new items, but we're not going to reinvent the wheel there into the section. And I think that's where most of the categories are going to be, probably for at least the back half of 2020 or even into early 2021. And then the pull and plug is just a simple one, and it typically is they don't really take in any new brands. It's basically existing brands changing up flavors. You might be take the banana flavor out, put the strawberry flavor in. That's typically what a pull and plug is. So that's really what's happening now is with the reset schedules getting pushed or delayed, they're going to be trying to cram more in towards the end of the year. And they're going to have to downplay them into mostly adjustments and pull and plugs.
Brands that we're expecting to be cut in, are there any reductions in those kinds of situations?
I don't think so. I mean, if you got the green light for your buyer category manager that you were going in and setting the items up, chances are you're going to be delayed if you're not already have been delayed. But for the most part, I believe you're going to get into the set. It's just going to take a little bit more time if you've already gone the official word. If you've had a meeting and it went very well and you're very confident, but they didn't make final decisions, then you might still be up in the air. It's going to depend on a lot of different factors out there.
Is there anyone who's tracking sort of the broad set of retailers who are doing category reviews and resets for up-to-date information?
Well, it's a very fluid situation. I know up here, Stop and Shop has transitioned. They're doing their resets at night. I think Whole Foods is doing the same thing. So they're kind of trying to keep to the schedule. But then there's a question about how much is really getting done. How efficient have they been? Are they going to have to go back and kind of fix these up later on down the line? But most retailers have kind of pushed them off, and there hasn't really been a set of like when it's kind of going to go live back, turn them back on.
Are there any opportunities that you're seeing that are being created with the change in reset timing?
Well, I mean, not too much right now. It might be down the line where some brands, unfortunately, some smaller brands are struggling. They might not make it through this, because of, the nature of the business. So that's probably where you're going to probably see a little bit of it. The other thing from the big CPG companies is a lot of the big CPG companies have pulled back innovation. And that's another thing that will dictate some of the reset schedules when timing's going to happen. Because a lot of times the retailers, especially the conventional retailers, they work around the big CPG companies when they're going to be launching items to try to time into that for those resets. So most of the major CPG companies have pulled back on their innovation, and what's going to be happening is, once they start announcing when they're going to be launching items, I think the retailers will be moving the schedule around to match it up to that.
So I just want to follow up on that for 1 second.
Yep.
Should the smaller brands be looking at those kind of vested interest products that come from the big brands, and how are they supposed to know when those are going to be cut in?
Well, that's really what communicating with your brokers and your sales reps and talking to the category managers and buyers, because that's probably when you're going to start seeing some notification out from the buyers and category managers about when the resets are going to be. Because if they got the big brands coming in there, that's when they're going to be looking to change everything around, do those resets and stuff. And it's going to, initially it's going to be tough on some of the smaller brands. If you don't have, if you're not already working with existing retailers, it's going to be tough to get products in 2020 because most of the buyers are probably going to just fall back on staying with their existing brands unless there's a big hole in the market or a brand is really just, lighting the world on fire. It's going to be tough for new brands to get into, especially on the conventional side, tough for small brands to get into new retailers.
So we've been discussing category reviews as a process, and that's the sort of in-store number crunching that takes place when we're identifying momentum and opportunities as buyers. But for most entrepreneurial brands, the moment they're really waiting for is the product review process. And that's the time when a buyer might be looking at what they have to offer. And to help give us another voice on how that particular part of the process is going for brands that are on their quest to acquire distribution, we're going to bring in Betsy Gillette, who's another sales expert and a co-founder and CEO of Synergy Sales Consulting Group. Betsy has worked with brands, with UNFI, and as a senior executive with Ignite Sales Management before she helped start Synergy. Betsy, welcome. Please tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here for the first time. So Synergy, we're the sales force for brands that don't have their own. So we help brands figure out their overall sales strategy, and then we go and execute that. We manage the distributors, the brokers, we track to the category reviews, we prepare the selling presentations, do the data and analytics to make sure that the brands are putting their best foot forward. And we're an integrated business partner with the brands that we work with, hopefully trying to take them to exit. So we work with about 8 to 10 brands at a time, roughly in the $2 to $25 million range. So. And
most of these brands are trying to add new stores and new territory. So they're in growth mode, or they're trying to break in for the first time. So how are buyers? Are they able to access buyers right now?
To reiterate what John said, yeah, it's tough right now. We are seeing some success in the natural channel a little bit more than in the conventional channel. Retailers like Fresh Thyme are moving forward with the resets. Whole Foods are doing, some category reviews and resets right now. It's a little bit, there's not as many items being approved as there once was, but we still have some access to the buyers, particularly in the natural channel. And I'm hopeful that once COVID is mostly behind us, then our broker partners can go out to retail and sell into the tiny independents like they always have. And obviously that's been on hiatus here for the past 8 weeks or so.
I just wanted to ask, when you get access to the buyers, are they willing as willing to roll the dice as they have been in the past?
It depends on the retailer. It's interesting. We'll talk to one buyer at a retailer and they'll say, yeah, we're moving forward and, send us your information. And then a different buyer from a different category is like, we're going to put it on hold. So it's just a mixed bag out there. And to John's point, doing your best to keep abreast of what's happening at each specific retailer you want to target is really important. Whether it's through your broker partners, directly with the buyers, the distributors, any piece of information you can get is really helpful right now. But I think some of the more forward-thinking retailers, particularly the ones that have traditionally taken a chance on new brands, like a Whole Foods, like sometimes Natural Grocers and Fresh Thyme, we're still getting the access to that. Things are being delayed and moving slower, but it's still happening.
What would you say is the average time it's taking from that buyer meeting to cutting in?
We don't know yet, because like at Whole Foods, it's, usually 8 or 9 months. It's probably still going to take that long, right? The question is, are these retailers, conventional or otherwise, if they make a decision today on what they want to bring in, when is that really going to happen? And I don't think they know that at this point. There's too many moving pieces, and different parts of the country are opening up a little faster than others. So I think the key message is that brands are going to have to be flexible and be able to move quickly when asked upon, regardless of it's when is a reset happening, or when these retailers decide they're going to change the category review timing. Like, they're going to send a note out, and within a week or two, you're going to have to submit your information, I think. So the brands need to be ready to do that.
And then they also need to be able to manufacture and ship, kind of at a moment's notice.
Yeah, that's another key piece that all our brands have really struggled with and have spent a lot of time on, is the whole supply chain piece. The one thing is to sell it in, but also to better understand how much product are they going to need to make. We saw this huge high in March, and now there's a little bit of a lull in April, and just better understanding how much product to make given cash constraints, given everything that's going on, has been a real challenge. And it's also interesting seeing some brands. One brand I heard of, they all of a sudden their glass bottles aren't available because something needed to be made for COVID, and all the supply was taken up. So they have to bob and weave, very quickly to make sure that they can still supply the product.
Are either of you finding that in cases like that, retailers are less likely to want to cooperate, or is that, I know that last week we talked about a certain spirit of, we can just get it done together. Are you two finding that?
I would say yes. Everyone wants to do the right thing. We've seen the distributors really step up and try to help and move product around where they can. I think the buyers and the retailers are going to try to do the same thing. It's just, what can they do? It's, it's a little, you just don't know yet.
Yeah, from the conventional retailer side, they've been very good about understanding. And the one thing I would stress is communication. If you think you potentially could have a problem with the product or timing wise, just communicate it to the buyer so they have an idea it's coming. And it's not just at the 12th hour, all of a sudden, oh, we don't have that product. Apologies, definitely go be ahead of the curve with that, be upfront with it, and tell them when, worst case scenario, what would be happening. So that's the one thing I would say about the communication.
Are there any categories that you're finding people are willing to do product reviews in right now?
It's interesting. It's one of the categories people are looking at is baking right now. We work with one baking brand that has everyday items and holiday specific, and a large Texas retailer reached out to us and said, we're ready to go now. It wasn't really a review time frame, but they knew we had the products and asked us to bring them in, so we did. So I think a bigger piece is, how do you be opportunistic when these situations arise? And I think, one of the other things some of our brands have seen is if an incumbent brand is not able to supply, then the retailer needs to fill their shelf. So we've had a Midwest retailer reach out to us on one of our frozen brands and said, hey, can you supply us a one-time shot for one truckload of product? And the good news for us is, we were able to supply it without shorting any of our other current customers. And hopefully it'll sell through, we'll get some reorders, and maybe we'll stay on shelf. So it's not really a category review, but being able to take advantage of opportunities when they come up, I think the brands need to be aware of.
Yeah, but like I represent a soup manufacturer, and we've had a lot of category reviews, but typically because soup is the time of year where you're reviewing soup for the fall. So I think certain categories, it probably like soup and baking, that's seasonal, are more apt to get the reviews done.
Yep.
So we have a question from our first call-in guest, Jillian Van Gin. I hope I'm saying that right. Who's the CEO of Fatso Peanut Butter. Jillian, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
All the way from Canada. So I guess I'll just jump right into my question. So we're a brand, we're in 21 stores in the Pacific Northwest in Whole Foods. We expanded there in October. We had planned on going down to Expo, and clearly some of our plans have been a bit derailed. And we do have a broker down in California, and we have distribution that can go down the I-5. So we're sort of forging ahead. So I'm curious to know, what advice would you have for people that are sort of already moving into the United States and hoping to expand during this time? We've already got the ball rolling, and so we're being careful about how we're doing it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on a Canadian brand or a brand from outside the US that's already in the midst of a US rollout.
Yeah, I don't know if it matters if you're from the U.S. or Canada at all. But the thing that you have to be wary of is how much cash do you need to spend, and how long is it going to take you to gain that distribution? I don't think you necessarily need to stop, because I think there's business to be had, but I think you need to be prepared that it's going to be a little bit slower than you otherwise would have thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
I think as it sounds like your brand is kind of independently store driven, and having those brokers go into stores to sell them, store by store, based on your distribution with UNFI or KE or however you're distributing, I think will be important. And continuing to talk to those brokers to see what they're able to actually accomplish in their market is going to be key for you.
Okay.
Jill, if you can stick with us for one sec, I can hear something going on in the background there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, how are you finding that your brokers are communicating well with you? And to throw it back to John, are there ways that you would work with your broker differently right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably from the expectations, I would say. Make sure they understand what you expect. It's the expectations are different now than they would have been had we not had this COVID-19 situation. And oftentimes brokers can get frustrated if they don't feel like they're getting enough done for you. So make sure they be reasonable with your expectations and timelines. And I think that's the number one thing, because you want to keep your broker's morale up on the brand, because you don't want to get them frustrated on it. So that would, the number one thing I'd say is, keep the morale up with your broker.
We refocused to really look at California, seeing as that we're up in Victoria, British Columbia. We went down to Washington and then to Oregon. So our plan was, hopefully a national rollout after Expo, but we've refocused to California. But the sustainability, to your point, Betsy and John, also looking for benchmarks from our brokers, I think is really good advice for us right now. We're looking to move slowly and actually use this as an opportunity to keep things slow and in control, because as a small Canadian brand with a market of 25 million, going into a place like California can be really ham-fisted. So we know that there's a real opportunity for a small brand like ours to really roll out of control quickly and have to pack it back to Canada with our tail between our legs.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we're doing right now with a lot of our brands is making sure that our broker partners have all the tools that they need in order to be successful. We're training them, retraining them. They've had some new people since maybe we've, did a brand refresh with them in the past. We're making sure that, they have access to all samples and VIP coupons and swag if it's available. So being prepared and ready to go, I think will be, help you as we come out of this here, hopefully in the next few weeks or months.
Okay, great.
Oh, so Jill, thank you very much for joining us. I just want to swing the question back to our retail experts real quick. Jillian was talking about the idea of whether or not things might have to turn into retreat. And some of that's dependent on how well the distributors are adapting to the situation, how well they're able to get product into stores. Are they able right now to build momentum for brands, or are they facing a lot of the same trouble that the retailers are?
It's a little bit of both, honestly. I mean, the distributors are doing a phenomenal job, I think. And, we don't always say that about our distributor partners, but I think right now they're really have stepped up and have tried to supply the best that they possibly can. They're bringing in additional resources and all of that. So first, they're trying to take care of the staple items as much as they possibly can. And then, they have had to take a little bit of a break, in my opinion, to forage new items and new distribution centers. They're not activating ancillary items, to try to grow volume. They want to make sure that those slots are taken up for the items that are actually going to sell and are a proven winner. But that said, I have seen both UNFI and KeHE, reach out to brands and work with brands that have essential items, like a pasta that's not activated in one DC, to see about activating in another because they're having a shortfall with a different supplier. So there have been some opportunities in that regard that, they need to do out of obviously necessity.
Are you finding the communication between brand and distributor is on the level it could be?
Honestly, we've always struggled with a little bit of that communication. I think the distributors are struggling a little bit right now because, they're not used to working from home, right? Where us in sales, we're all of us work from home. So they had to get computers set up, they had to get, places to work, so I think it took them a while to get used to working from home and get all of that acclimated. And I think that they're all so busy just taking care of their customer that it is a little bit harder to get in touch with them right now. I think their generic communication from their organizations out to the brand community has been pretty strong. We're getting regular updates from UNFI and KeHE and other distributors. But in terms of working directly with your buyers in particular, that has been more challenging because they're just so busy. So asking for something special has been a little difficult.
Yeah, so Jeff, I tag onto that and say, items that are set up in the system are, are obviously a lot more easy for them to move with versus trying to get new SKUs set up. Because once again, you get people working in all different, it's not working in the office.
Did we just lose John?
Oh, there he is.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the middle to end of that. You were talking about items that are in the system?
Items that are currently set up, it's a lot easier for the distributors to move through that versus items that might not be set up in the system yet. If they have to create new items, it's more cumbersome, especially where everything is disjointed. They're not all working in an office. Everyone's working out of their homes.
So we just went through a period where there was massive throughput and a lot of demand from retailers for everything. I mean, mid-March to mid-April, we were looking at some stats from the IRI, and the number of customers coming into categories or the number of purchases that were taking place was over-indexed by like 200% in some places. Certainly frozen went nuts, for example. Have your brands been able to keep up, and are they getting notification back from the distributors that there's demand to fill?
John, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so every manufacturer is different, and many manufacturers have basically taken a policy of, we're going to worry about our top 20% of the items that might do 80% of our volume, the 80-20 rule,
Yeah.
and work on getting those products to the stores, to the distributors, and thus to the stores. And once again, I'll lean back to the communication, making sure you're communicating that to the retailers and distributors. That's what I see good manufacturers doing, is really focusing on the top selling items and making sure to keep those in stock. Because that's going to be the best bang for the buck for the manufacturer, the distributor, and the retailer. That's where everyone's going to win. Because everybody understands when the volume, like you said, frozen vegetables, frozen fruit, handheld snacks, pizza. I mean, the numbers are just astronomical. So no one could possibly plan that, and they burnt through any backroom stock they had. So that it's really about communicating. And I think most manufacturers are doing a good job communicating to the distributors and to the retailers on what's happening there.
I wanted to shift for a minute or two back toward the product review process, because we know so many people are sort of frozen in place, sheltering at home. Are they willing to review products? Are they willing to take samples? Do they have to go into the office to get that? So how is that actual face-to-face changing?
Well, what my experience and my team's experience has been is it's really difficult to get samples out at the moment. We have had some instances where, we are part of a category review. We can't send samples, but the buyer reaches out specifically and says, I want these items because I want to try them. And they'll say, either send them to my office because I'm going to be there on a certain day, or in some cases, they've actually given us their home address. That's more the exception than the rule. But right now it's really hard to get samples. As it relates to the category review meetings, I think we're going to go back to seeing in-person meetings, because it's just so hard to have that relationship with the buyer when you're doing it over the phone or the Zoom, right? For me, when I go into some retailer meetings, like, I already know these people, so they already know the brand, they know the people. So having 1 or 2 meetings via Zoom is not a problem. It's a little harder when you don't know each other, and I don't think it'll be a long-term thing. I think we'll go back to kind of we'll call it the old days at this point.
Yeah,
John, do you feel that way?
Yeah, one thing I was interested, especially on samples, I reiterate what Betsy said, but one thing on samples, we get a lot of requests for a PDF of your packaging, the front and the back, with a nutritional panel and a scannable UPC, and ingredients, which is very important. So everybody should really have that for every one of their products. And part of the reason for that is there are multiple people in the office that work on stuff. It might be, there's sugar tax now in certain states and certain cities. So someone's going to be looking at the ingredients and nutritionals and some of the special bib tags they have. If it's a nutritional item, 0 fat, organic, all those type of things. So it's a good policy now to have a PDF of both the front and back of your package, of your label, that you can get out to the brokers for every one of your items, because that's very handy for the buyers to have something like that.
That's really good advice. So we know that, first of all, I just want to ask, are there any product review cycles or category review cycles that are just done for the year, even it only being May?
I think not that I'm aware of. I think the retailers are going to move forward with their category reviews. I think they're going to end up prioritizing certain ones that have to get done in the fall, as John mentioned, whether it's baking or soup. But I wouldn't definitively say if you're in this category, you're out of luck. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, it's going to vary by retailer.
Okay. But for emerging brands, we know it's going to be taking longer. Are there is there advice that you have for them as they kind of try and wait it out?
Well, one thing I would say is don't, if you're getting frustrated, just don't go after accounts for the sake of going after accounts. If they're an account that 3 months ago you said, well, we're not interested because it's not the right fit, just because this happened doesn't make them the right fit, because you're going to spend good money after bad, because 99 out of 100 times it's going to be a bad spend, whether it's slotting, promotions, manpower to go into that retailer. If you decide that retailer doesn't fit your protocol for what you want to be selling, don't change the decision because 3 of the ones you wanted to get into, now you're not going to be able to. You're much better off, hold on to that cash. Tell your investors you need to hold on, you need to wait, unfortunately, because you have to wait for these reviews. Don't just go chasing after retailers that are not going to perform for you.
Yep. And I think working on where you have distribution, making sure that that velocity is where you want it to be. It's a little hard to do right now given COVID, but where you've got it, like make sure that it's performing, whether, you have a plan for geo-targeting and social media pushes in the meantime, or, having a demo plan ready once we're able to safely do demos again, or IRCs and that sort of thing. I think shoring up your current business is going to be, it's going to be important because you're going to need that velocities and, when you come out of this on the other side. I think there's also some other channels that some brands in the meantime can go after, whether it's, subscription box programs and GoPuff and Funny James Box. I mean, there's a ton of them out there that could be the right fit for certain brands. Not a ton of volume, but it does keep the product moving, and it gets a little bit of brand awareness out there. QVC is another one. I've had a few brokers reach out to me on QVC about QVC because they're starting to sell more food online.
Oh, that's a very interesting channel opportunity there, both QVC and HSN. There's certainly social distancing there. I did want to ask though, are there any of these sort of visibility based channels that are actually sources of revenue?
I think there's a little bit of revenue to be had. I don't think it's huge amounts, right? I think it's probably, I don't see that from our brands necessarily. So I don't know exactly what kind of revenue it is, but my guess is it's fairly small. And hopefully it's profitable, right? If you can't do it at a profit, then I probably wouldn't, but I don't think it's huge.
So we had a question in from the audience, and it takes us back just a little bit into the land of Zoom. Whether or not we go back to the days of face-to-face meetings, right now we are in this sort of Zoom chat era. And I wonder if there are any tips that you're able to share for folks who may be pitching buyers via Zoom or a remote setup.
I think be yourself, right? Be prepared. Treat it like any other meeting that you would go to. Get dressed for the day, right? Sit up straight, all those good things that your mother taught you. But also have samples to show them, right? They might not be able to taste them on the spot, but you can show them, talk about the brand and be energetic, and be as engaging as you possibly can be. But also know that, these Zoom calls, at least the ones that I have had have been 30 minutes. And usually that turns into 20 minutes of real selling time because 5 minutes, everyone's trying to figure out how to use Zoom. And the other 5 minutes is for introduction. So, have a very concise message, and be poignant and be prepared and well-practiced.
Yeah,
John,
definitely from a time standpoint, Jeff, because the buyers, everyone talks about buyers never stay on schedule. They're kind of like doctors, they just think we got all day type of thing. But doing it on Zoom, they're more apt to try to stay on schedule because they can see some of the guys have like 2 Zoom rooms set up, so they can see the other one, people are waiting. So they're more apt to stay on target. Love Betsy's idea about the showing some product, have the samples. And the other thing is, if you're in a category where, item dimensions vary on, multiple brands have different unit dimensions, you can talk about that. Like, this is the same size bottle as X, or same size box, same width, because those are things that they would think about if they were in their office. They'd have it in their hands. They kind of understand it. So that's important to a buyer.
Yeah, now is not the time to be introducing a sort of unorthodox product shape, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yep.
So we've heard a lot of advice about filling the gap, moving products to prime accounts during the crisis. And I wonder, what's the best way to say, I'm going from a B account to an A account if you're dealing with that B account?
John, do you want to go first?
I can go first. I mean, the big CPG companies put everybody on allocation. You do 2% of our business, you get 2% of the product, and, everyone wants to jump, especially smaller companies, they want to jump at new opportunities. The one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to exhaust all your inventory and then have existing customers not be able to get any product. So you definitely want to understand, what you really have and what you have for extra that you can give to somebody, other new accounts, and understand, we have one piece we haven't talked about today is co-packers, right? Some co-packers are running 100%, some are running at 50%, some have been shut down for a couple of weeks. So you really have to understand, what your inventory situation is, number one, and where you can get more stuff manufactured, where you at with your co-packer. And because you don't want to jump onto a new account and burn existing accounts.
Yeah, and I think going back to what John mentioned before is, there are some opportunities out there and opportunistic selling propositions, but if it's not a retailer that you would go after normally, then, don't do it now, just to be there. And understand what it takes to be successful in those accounts, whether it's promotional activity or other such support, because you're gonna be playing with the bigger guys at that point, so be ready.
So one of the things that we've seen more and more of from the big guys and from all kinds of retailers via services like Mercado, the progress of curbside and delivery is really changing. How is that rolling back and affecting the brands that you two work with?
Well, I think when people buy online, they're less apt to buy new things, right? They're typically going to buy items that they always buy. So for young brands, that's tough because a lot of it is impulse, seeing something new, exciting. People see it in the store, they pick it up off the shelf. When you're ordering off of a computer screen, or doing a curbside, you're just basically buying stuff that So it kind of, I think people tend to fall back into just the major brands from that standpoint.
And I think, what smaller brands can do, or any brand for that matter, is just make sure that on those platforms that your products are well represented with their images and their search engines, and every retailer is a little bit different on how that's managed. But, just make sure that everything is up to date. So when a consumer clicks on your product, it is a really good representation of it.
Are there certain packaging or assortment recommendations that your clients are following on optimizing for curbside?
For mine, no, it's just the normal products that we would sell every day.
Yeah, I don't see anything of that for the curbside happening.
Okay. So I think we have another caller here, and it's Hollis Calloway, who's the founder of Montaigne Sparkling Spring Water. Good to have a Southerner here, Hollis.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Hey, Hollis.
So what's your question, sir?
Well, with the shift to online grocery shopping and being an emerging brand, I agree that it is, people go with what they're familiar with, and it can be challenging to stand out on the page. Our toolbox for growing is very much conventional and experiential. We, sampling, building a pretty display, sponsoring events, and all things that aren't possible right now. So we've been trying to figure out how to promote on Instacart, how to win in the online grocery space, and not having much success, and would appreciate if y'all have any guidance or advice. Specifically, we're looking to promote within Instacart, and finding an agency that's willing to work with a brand, our size has been a challenge.
I was just going to recommend finding someone, that's not my space that I spend a lot of time in, but the brands that I know that are fairly well successful, whether it's on Amazon e-commerce or even Instacart, they have agencies to help them. So if you want to connect after, I can give you some recommendations on who might help you with that. But in my opinion, it's worth it for a brand to spend a little bit of money to find someone that knows what they're doing, to make sure that they get set up right and get off on the right foot.
Great.
Yeah, it's a tough situation right now. Like you said, you really, people have to kind of find it and taste it. There's so many options out there on single serve beverage. So it makes it difficult. Now, I don't know Instacart, I don't know that industry that well, but is there something where you could give some product away, to certain customers, their top customers? I don't know if Instacart works on some of the stuff like that. I don't know what retailers you're in. Is there a way you can do some free product? Something like that, because obviously you're not spending right now money on demos and other sampling events. So kind of funneling some money that way.
The other question that you might want to think about, Hollis, is how extended are you outside of your home region? And is it possible to double down on location-based marketing within your core areas?
And what examples of location-based marketing do you have in mind?
Well, for location-based marketing, I'd suggest speaking with our CMO, Mike Schneider, who's actually written the book on location-based marketing. But beyond that, I think it's just important to keep focusing in on those places where you're strongest, even if that means that you're promising trade spend for the next quarter.
Agreed. Sounds good.
How many brick and mortar stores are you in, Hollis?
600.
Okay. So, I mean, there's something to work with, and obviously single serve beverage is highly consumable, so people will, buy multiples and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think,
we're primarily sold by the 8-pack.
Okay.
Yep.
So I did just want to ask though, Betsy and John, are there certain incentives that, I mean, is the whole incentive tap kind of turned off right now for retailers, or are there ways that emerging brands can bring buyers into their corner right now?
I think, it's going to be a little bit different by brand and the type of product that you have, but, promotions, most retailers are still running promotions. Some took a little bit of a hiatus, but what I'm seeing is, come May and June, they're going to back on track with running TPR. So I think putting the pedal to the metal there, the best that you can. Granted, timing is an issue because if you put a promotion in now, it might not run for a couple months, depending on the retailer. But doing that, I think IRC coupons, communicating with your customers, whether it's through Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and any sort of geo-targeting really helps. And what we've done with some of our brands, not just because of COVID, but we're putting one-pagers together and sending those of all the activities that we're doing to try to make sure that those consumers are engaged with our brand. We're sending that over to the buyers and letting them know that we're doing. We're putting videos on Facebook and that sort of thing. And the buyer doesn't have to do anything per se, but they know that we're really working on our business and trying to make it successful at that retailer.
Yeah, it's the best thing you can do for the buyer, really.
Is just be effective and show the buyer how effective you are. So Hollis, there's one other thing I wanted to point out. A couple weeks ago, I had a conversation with with Betsy McGinn of McGinn Sales and Marketing, who specializes in sort of prepping brands for Amazon. One of the things that she recommended at that time was actually being ready to spend on internet advertising, because a lot of larger brands were pulling back on that. So that made it a cheaper spend for an emerging brand, and one that could help you stand out a little bit more on something like an Amazon. Now, that may not do great on an Instacart, but if you're aiming for that sort of online channel, it's the kind of thing that an agency might put you in, it might put you on the track to do.
Okay.
All right. And I hope it's helpful. And I know that we'll be back with some more online folks in the weeks to come. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So John and Betsy, I just wonder how long you think brands should be anticipating this kind of, I mean, look, no one knows when this is going to end, but I guess how resilient has the industry been when it comes to kind of getting back to normal in the past?
Like, that's the number one question I get from our brands and, my industry friends, and, I don't have a crystal ball. I think that, there are going to be some small brands that don't make it through this, right? They don't have enough cash to get them where they need to be. And they can't get enough sales in the short term to help them with that whole process. So, going back to normal, I don't think is, whatever that, we're going to have a new normal, right? But I do think that the industry will rebound fairly quickly. I think, as John mentioned, we're still going to be trying to figure our way through this for the remainder of 2020. Hopefully I'll be back on track for 2021, but it remains to be seen.
I think it's gonna be like a domino effect, Jeff. Once certain retailers stop bringing product in, if Whole Foods starts taking on a lot of new items, or Kroger, it's gonna be like a domino effect where chains are gonna like, oh, this guy's doing it, Wegmans is doing it, we gotta get going on this, because that's typically what happens in the industry anyway.
Is there any number crunching you'd recommend brands do that's a little different from what's been done in the past?
I can't see anything different. I mean, I'm anticipating some retailers saying, well, if you took COVID out of this, how would you be performing? Well, who knows, right? We'll try to figure that out, but we haven't done that exercise yet.
All right. Both of you, I really appreciate you taking the time and working with us through some minor technical difficulties. I wanted to thank our AV head, Joshua Pratt, and our producer, Jackie Brugliera, who've been working away back there, as well as Betsy Gillette and John Maggiore. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Next week,
My pleasure.
it's so great to have experts that we can rely on, and that the industry can rely on for advice and answers during what's a really tough time. Next week, we're going to be back with a pair of guests who can speak to the kinds of issues that brand owners are working through with their boards of directors. We'll have Brad Barnhorn, who actually is on a board with John right now, as well as Alan Murray, the former CEO of Goodbelly. I want to make sure that people understand that tomorrow we're going to be having our elevator talk with special guest Megan Bent, the founder and managing director of Harbinger Ventures. I'm sure both of you have worked with some brands in their portfolio. And to the audience, I just want to say, it's a wild time right now, for sure. And, you know, if you look closely at this glamorous sushi screen that I have behind me, you'll know that I, like many of you, am working from an improvised space, and we're all improvising. And we should all feel fortunate that we get the opportunity to share our connections. And I feel fortunate about the opportunity to extend our platform to hopefully help you to succeed during these really difficult times. I also want us to think for the next week about the tremendous luck we all have to be working in some way to provide food to consumers and to help everyone keep going, from healthcare providers at the front line to our families on the home front. I want to wish everyone safety and luck until we get to speak again next Tuesday at 3. Have a great week filled with care and good fortune. And thanks for joining us on Office Hours.